For Commando's secondary, I take the combat knife. The trade-off of the range for the debuff that lets you do a ton of burst damage is super worth it in my opinion, and helps him get a lot of single target DPS. For the utility, I prefer the tactical dive. The iframes are way more important than the ability to attack while you're using it, and it also feels more fluid maintaining the same speed as you use it, as opposed to starting out faster and slowing down later. Also, this ability lets you negate fall damage, which the slide doesn't do. For the special, I take the shotgun. As I mentioned before, it combos really well with the dagger, and losing out on the stun that the default has isn't even that big of a deal, as the shotgun usually staggers. Not only is it able to hit multiple enemies at the same time, but it also is much quicker, and you won't be stuck in an animation taking damage or even dying. My name is Seth, I play a lot of Risk of Rain Returns, and these are the abilities that I use to beat Monsoon consistently. Welcome to Moose World. For Huntress, I prefer her default primary, mostly because her alternate feels so lackluster. You lose the ability to move at full speed while using it, and you have to charge it for a while before it does any real damage. Not to mention, Huntress's kit already has plenty of AoE, so it's pretty redundant. Her alternate secondary Laser Cyclone is just an all-around great ability. Replacing Glaive makes it a little harder for her to deal with flying enemies, but the constant source of group damage more than makes up for this. For the utility, I take Warp Dart. In a pinch, you can fire this quickly to move similarly to Blink, but it offers so much more aside from that. Even a short charge gets Huntress a moderate distance much further than Blink. And if you really want to, you can get pretty creative with it. It's close, but for Enforcer, I prefer the default primary over the alternate. The range and damage are only slightly better, but you lose most of the pierce and you're forced to reload, which can get really annoying. The best time to use the primary is if you ever have a chance to use the shield stance, and reloading hurts your ability to stunlock enemies. I'd say that Shield Tackle is basically a strict upgrade to the default secondary. The fact that it has iframes and burst movement on an otherwise slow survivor is really hard to pass up. It also gets you out of a tight spot if you sit in shield mode for too long, which is basically the only use of the default secondary anyway. For the special, I take Disperse. It's his best ability for burst damage, which he definitely needs. It has good single target and group damage, just try and jump before using it, as it has much better hitboxes than if you use it grounded. For Bandit, I have two different builds. The first is a ranged build that uses his default primary and utility, but alternate special. Unlike its Risk of Rain 2 counterpart Desperado, stacking Standoff gives Bandit bonus damage to his entire kit. Buffing his first two abilities feels really nice, so try to build stacks from a range, and use his invisibility if the timer runs out or if you're in too much danger. The next build is a melee build, using his alt primary, alt utility, and his default special. It has a bit of a specific playstyle. Basically, you want to fight in the melee range inside your smoke bombs, where the enemies can't attack you, and use Lights Out to refresh your smoke bomb cooldown as often as you can. Just remember that you're not invincible inside your smoke bomb, so you can still get hit by things like range attacks or really quick flying enemies. Andy is a bit of an interesting character. The healing drones feel nice at first, but are quickly outclassed by both of the other drones. Blast can do a lot of damage really quickly, but it loses out on the homing ability, which is actually pretty important for the survivor, so consider that when you're deciding between Blast or the attack speed drones. For the special, I use the default because enemies can easily fall out of the saw, so it's better to do the damage all at once. For Engineer, I recommend a full default kit, though the primaries are pretty interchangeable. The alternate mines just don't do enough damage, and even though they get more use from backup mags, having the burst damage from the bouncing mines is too valuable. And as cool as the beam turret is, it's very finicky to use. The default turrets are powerful in their own right, plus they take aggro from enemies, including Providence. Also, I'm going to let this clip speak for itself. Crush and Throwing Axe are pretty similar in terms of power, but the axes really shine once you fill your heat bar, which gets you attack speed and pierce. They're pretty fun to use and also let you cheese some enemies pretty frequently, though Crush does have a larger range than you expect. After using both, I don't see any reason not to take Drill Charge. The only real difference between this and the alternate is that it doesn't hold you in place if you hit an enemy, but the default already carries enemies along as you use it, so you effectively only lose movement by taking it. I take Burnout for the utility because this default has always felt a bit awkward for me. It's a second dash that goes backward and doesn't carry momentum very well, so I would much rather have an ability that adds something unique to my kit. This is the build that I use for Sniper, and I actually think it's one of the strongest builds in the game. While both secondaries are good, I like to take Quickscope because it still adds a ton of damage without having to charge it up. I don't find the knockback on the melee primary very useful because backflip already puts a lot of distance between you and the enemy, and you give up your ability to quickly reload if you miss the boost. If you're dead set on using it though, I think this build works best. Acrid's alternate primary basically lets you start the game with a Shattering Justice. Your primary already isn't your main damage source, so being able to add stacks to buff your stronger abilities is a huge positive. A lot of Acrid's game plan is running in, hitting the enemy and leaving, so the alternate primary works perfectly for that. While some people find the bubble underwhelming, it does almost as much damage as the spit in just 3 ticks, plus a lot more if you manage to land the explosion. It also has the added use of providing bouncy platforms, which helps out a lot more often than you'd think. I take Caustic Sludge here partly because the alternate is just not good. Best case scenario, you're just using it the same way as the Marble Gate equipment by leaving it at the teleporter to loot, but you're trading out one of your best damage abilities to do that. Merc's parry ability is really fun and just flat out good. Even on a miss, it doesn't do too bad of damage, and late game, there's so many attacks flying at you that you probably won't miss that often. Also, you can use the parry to block fall damage, which is pretty funny. Skyward Assault does really good group damage and also gives Mercenaries some of the verticality he's missing from not having Whirlwind or a double jump. It can be a little awkward to use at times though, since you have to start at least slightly distant from your target, but I still think it's worth taking over the default. Honestly, both of Mercenary specials are really good. Even though I prefer using Eviscerate for the generous hitbox and iframes, his alternate can be really fun to use, especially if you get some items that reduce your ability cooldowns. Plus, you can replace the immunity Eviscerate gives you with your parry, so you aren't really losing out either way. If you just take Loader's default kit and add in their alternate secondary, you lose out on the iframes, but swap it with a really powerful attack that also lets you move around the map really quickly. This kit is a blast to play, just remember to mash the primary instead of holding it down so you get the fastest attack speed. Also, if you aren't familiar from the first game, Loader's pylons work like corners in a rectangle even though it looks like they form a line, so you can exploit that to get huge areas of damage by placing them on different levels. I find that Chef works best with a ranged primary and their default special. There's really no benefit to using the melee primary, and the default special lets you do a ton of burst damage with either Dice or Sear. The buffs from Cook are interesting, but don't last very long at all, and you miss out on a lot when you can't use your upgraded abilities. The utilities are pretty similar, but I prefer Oil Jar because it lets you coat your enemies multiple times per cast. This ability also lets you attack with full move speed, but the area is pretty small if you don't boost the ability, and jumping slows you down to your normal strafe speed again. Both of Pilot's primaries are good, but I use Rapid Fire. Pilot's other abilities do enough area damage that I don't need the Pierce on the default, and after getting used to Rapid Fire, his first primary feels pretty sluggish. As fun as rapid deployment is, you can't dispute the usefulness of Pilot's Wave Dash. It's pretty easy to learn how to do and really fun when you can start landing good ones. Also, the devs know about this, and it sounds like they're deciding to leave it in the game, so go ahead and try this out if you haven't. Pilot's alternate special is really weak. The damage on it is only slightly better than the default one, except it can only affect one enemy. On top of that, his default special has brief immunity when you use it, and the momentum can of course be used as another small jump even when wave dashing. Even after the recent buffs, Artificer feels the weakest of any survivor for most players, myself included. In the current state of the game, I definitely recommend taking the Flamethrower over its alternate ability and pairing that with Tectonic Surge in the utility slot because it lets you jump out of your special early. As far as the secondaries go, I have her default listed because I don't feel like the extra inputs that the alt asks you to do are worth the reward if you pull them off. I still have some hope though, because Artificer was also much weaker in the release version of Risk of Rain 2, but was steadily brought up to compete with or outperform the other survivors. Drifter has probably the strongest default kit of any survivor, but I still take the Scrap Cube because I think it's one of the coolest abilities in the game. It does a ton of area damage on cast and whenever you knock it around with your autos, plus it lets you do a ton of creative things like riding on it to avoid fall damage or stacking them to reach places you otherwise couldn't. Suffocate is another one of Drifter's insanely good abilities. It's the fastest way to fill the scrap bar, but it also has a 20% health execute that works on every enemy in the game, including every phase of the Providence fight. Finally, Drifter has the unique ability to spend scrap to spawn temporary items, which can really snowball or at least help you keep up if you ever fall behind. But I don't think you will. Honestly, this ability is even more powerful than the execute. It is worth noting though that the alternate ability Recycle can be used on the same item multiple times, unlike the equipment in the second game, though I would still take Salvage over it. That's my build for every survivor in Risk of Rain Returns. Let me know if I missed anything, or if you think I'm stupid, or you tried my build and lost, or anything. Your words cannot hurt me. Now here's a clip of me getting 5 temporary jetpacks. Goodbye.